Hello and welcome back. So today we'll be going over the top 10 best IR stashes right now, and we'll touch on specifically why you would own each player and what the timetable looks like for their return. Now, this is part of my philosophy of putting together the best roster to compete in a head-to-head playoff matchup, and when your fantasy playoffs roll around, you want your opponent to think, how the hell does this guy have all these good players? So let's dive into the number one IR stash right now, and it will likely be a longer term IR stash, but there's no debate. It has to be Evander Kane at number one on this list. He is a fantasy unicorn. So along with maybe Brady Tkachuk and one or two other guys, these are the only kind of players that are close to a point per game average and who cover about 3 hits per game. And you can see with this graph that I made from November 9th, when he was still active, Brady Tkachuk was putting up a little bit more points than Evander Kane, but Evander Kane was out hitting Brady Tkachuk, so that could potentially make him a little bit more valuable in certain league formats. Now, quick side note, if you want this point producing hitters graph or a number of other useful tools and visualizations to help your fantasy team, just click the Patreon link in the description below. Very inexpensive, especially if you can use these tools to make a crucial trade or a waiver pickup for your fantasy team that can put you over the top and get you into the playoffs. But with Kane, you get 3.64 hits per game, which rivals most top hitting defensemen and some of the best forwards out there, including Janot, Blais, Marcus Foligno, etc. But with that, you also get close to a point per game. So 0.92 points per game this year, 13 points in 14 games. But you also get incredible shot volume. 3.57 shots per game is top 10th percentile in the league. And then on top of all of that, you get a 30-goal pace from him as well. Now, they listed him at 3 to 4 months recovery time, and that was on November 9th, which would land him back on your roster around mid to late February. So you will have to wait this one out a little bit. But if you're planning your roster to specifically win head-to-head playoff matchups, as I talked about before, and you should be if you're in striking distance of a playoff spot right now, then he's a guy you are definitely going to want to have in your lineup come April. So maybe try to think about a trade option, but a lot of people know exactly how valuable he is, so it might take a lot to pry him away from someone. Now, another guy you'll want in April is Gabe Landeskog, and he's owned up for sure. So 94% ownership. You would definitely have to float a trade offer out there, but he is dual position eligible as a center left wing, and that does help your positional flexibility. And if you look at it this past year, which is really all we can go off of right now, he was at a 1.15 point per game average last year, about 0.20 above his 5-year average, but even his 5-year average makes him a target in fantasy. So same with goal production. Last year, he was incredible on a 47 goal pace, 0.58 goals per game, gave him 30 goals, 59 points in 51 games, which also shows what his stats might look like this year after missing 20 to 30 games. So that's something that you can expect. And I don't know if you can expect 1.15 points per game, but he'll be close to that anyways. And he is a goal producing, center left wing dual option. So in addition to that, you get a decent amount of shots from Landeskog. So anything over 3 shots per game is pretty great, but he's really close to that number, so he's not bad in that category at all. You also get extremely good power play exposure and production on top of that. So 0.29 power play points per game is what you'd expect, and the icing on the cake is 1.84 hits per game, which gives him really good peripheral coverage. He's definitely not Evander Kane in that regard, but 1.84 hits per game is pretty good for a skilled player. This is why he's 94% owned. So his original timeline was about 12 weeks due to a knee surgery, which would put him coming back in early January, so about a month from now. If you made the trade now while he's still quiet, nobody's talking about it, that kind of thing, you may or may not be able to get away with the 4 weeks of him on the IR, and then the period after he comes back when he's probably not up to speed yet. But the point is, you do want this player for your playoff run, so maybe try to target him if somebody's in a bind and they need an extra IR spot and he's sitting there on their IR. Now, number 3 is Nick Ehlers, and he's really an under-the-radar example. He had 3 assists in 2 games this year before going down with an injury. Then right before he was coming back from that injury, he recently had sports hernia surgery, and he's slated to be back in less than 6 weeks, which looks like early to mid-January right now. So that's how long you're going to have to wait for Ehlers. But when you watch him play, you notice the speed, and you notice his ability to carry the puck, enter the zone, but we all tended to think of him as a playmaker. But all of that went out the window in 2021 when he popped off for almost a point per game. He was on a 36-goal pace and was averaging over 3 shots per game, showing that he was good for more than just assists and power play totals. But that year, his power play numbers were good as well at .27 power play points per game. The next year, his goal scoring pace stayed where it was, 37-goal pace, but the shot volume erupted for 8th best in the league at 3.95 shots per game, and that makes him very valuable in fantasy. So the peripheral coverage isn't as good as Landeskog or Kane, but the shot volume is better than both, and the point totals should be there as well. And now if Winnipeg can keep this level of play up, he'll be coming back into an engine that's firing on all cylinders with a new coach in Rick Bowness that's kind of solidified their defense a little bit. So this is a guy that I'm currently stashing on my IR. He's a dual left wing, right winger. And this is somebody that I'm going to be looking to, I actually made a trade for him, targeting him for this exact reason. So I did put my money where my mouth is on this one. Another guy I'm currently holding on my IR, and have been since the draft, is Max Pacioretty. So he's a proven goal scorer and a shot volume guy in fantasy. And if you look at his last 3 seasons, you see tremendous numbers, but also tremendous consistency. So in terms of goals, 0.45 goals per game, 0.5, and then 0.48 over the last 3 seasons. So incredibly consistent there. Same type of thing with points and shots as well. And even power play numbers. They're all really within the same 0.5, 0.05 range of all of the other numbers. So you can see 0.97 point per game average over the last 3 years. So every year he's 0.95, 0.97, 1, something to that effect. 3.91 shots per game over the last 3 years is really, really elite level. And I'm currently looking over the team numbers, and I'll be putting out a few dashboards for team offensive numbers either today or tomorrow. But Carolina is 6th worst in the league in terms of goals for, and 13th best in the league in terms of expected goals. But most importantly, they are dead last in the league in terms of team shooting percentage with 7.62%. So this is where Pacioretty can help the Canes. And they're going to need to lean on him for the playoff stretch, as they've played 22 games and they've only won 11 of them. They currently sit 3rd in the Metro, and they're going to need him down the stretch. He's going to shoot the puck a lot and hopefully increase their shooting percentage, hopefully increase their power play percentage, and he's currently pretty low rostered compared to some of these other IR options. So if he's there and you want a little boost for the playoff stretch, especially if you need left wingers, definitely stash him. He's been skating on his own. I doubt he's particularly close, but I'd imagine him back around January, which still gives him about half the season to put up some numbers for your team. And as I said before, the main reasons I targeted him, 0.48 goal per game and 3.91 shots per game, plus regular, point per game point totals and the power play numbers. And Carolina is definitely going to need that this year. So this is a guy I'm waiting for and hoping he can solidify my left wingers, because that's my weakest spot. Now, the third guy in a row that I have on my IR is Patrik Laine. And my IR is completely full. So those are my IR positions: Ehlers, Pacioretty, and Laine. But Laine is dual position eligible, left winger, right winger. And in 8 games, 4 points, 2 goals, 2 assists, hasn't gotten it going yet. But the shot volume is better than it's ever been in his career at 3.625 shots per game. Laine's shooting percentage is 6.9%, which is about 10% lower than it usually is. So I would look for more goals to come when he gets back healthy. But this now falls into the category of power play targets on bad teams, as the Blue Jackets season is likely over already, and they are desperately trying to find people to play on the power play now with a lot of injuries that have been hitting them lately. And lately, the guy who's been filling in is Kent Johnson, who's actually been doing a pretty good job. But it needs to be Laine and it needs to be Gaudreau on that power play across from each other in order for this unit to have success. Now, there is one reason to proceed with caution when it comes to Laine, and this is why he's a little bit lower on this list at number 6. As I looked at his 5-year file, it seems like he has one excellent year and then follows that up with a bad one. So last year, 1 point per game. The year before that, 0.52. Almost half as prolific. Then before that, 0.92 points per game, and then the year before that, 0.60, and then before that, 0.85. So it's like every other year he's playing really well, and when he's playing well, he's actually increasing his point totals. So that might be the indication that the smart move would be to potentially draft him next year. Or if you're in a keeper league, trade him, in the near future and hold him for next year. Because if you're looking at that pattern, it signals that this year might actually just continue to be a down year, and next year he'll potentially pop off. Now, number 7 on the list is Tom Wilson, and historically speaking, he's a two-trick pony. So he scores some goals, but he mainly hits. And last year, I owned Tanner Jeannot, and I was pushing him to all you guys in the preseason, and the reasoning was because he got 24 goals and close to 4 hits per game. Well, the main comparable to Jeannot is Wilson, and Wilson has done it longer and more consistently. So if you have Jeannot this year, or if you've been looking for a player like that and haven't found it yet, maybe try to grab Tom Wilson. So he's been skating on his own, but he hasn't skated with the team yet. He looks to be on the timeline that was originally set, which would have him back at the end of December or early January. But as I mentioned before, he was pretty much a two-trick pony. 3.08 hits per game is excellent. Jeannot is about a hit per game higher. So even if he's not scoring, Jeannot is still going to out-hit Tom Wilson potentially. And I believe Wilson's coming off shoulder surgery, so that's something to keep in mind as well. But you probably will get a 22-goal pace out of him. He's done that. That's his 5-year average. So that's some consistency, and Washington desperately needs him back in the lineup. They need to get healthy so they can start to make a playoff push. So if they do make a playoff push, that could potentially help if you own Wilson in fantasy. Now, the next guy on this list, Val Nichushkin, is a bit of a different case study, as he's played 7 games this year and is slated to potentially come back in the next week or so. In those 7 games, it was hard to find anyone in the league any better. So 7 goals, 12 points, 3.7 shots per game, and a menace on the power play and the PK as well, if your league gives you points for shorthanded goals and points. You can see 5 power play goals, a power play assist, 1 shorthanded goal, 1 shorthanded assist. So that's incredible if your league factors that in. There are 2 negatives to keep in mind with Nichushkin. Number 1, he has never produced anything close to this level. So if you look at his last couple seasons, 0.17 point per game, 0.41, 0.38, 0.83, and now 1.7 points per game. So there's definitely room for regression. But maybe that happens when Landeskog comes back and he loses that power play spot. Who knows? But number 2, his shooting percentage is 26.9%, which is about double what he usually performs at. So there's regression there as well. And he's still a good option, but be careful if you're trading for him and you're giving up something substantial. But again, he should be back within the next week or so it's not a long-term hold. And if you likely held on to him, it's probably not going to be a situation where you traded him away or dropped him or anything. It wasn't that long of an absence. Now, this is one that is a lot less promising because Duclair underwent surgery for an Achilles injury, which is a very difficult injury to come back from. But Duclair routinely used his speed to create chances, so that may impact his game on the ice this year. But the reasons you would own him are for his goal production, which is 0.41 goals per game, 31 goals last year in 74 games. But he also put up 0.78 points per game last year as well. And his power play production was pretty good at 0.28 power play points per game. Florida needs to add a little bit more scoring as their team shooting percentage is 6th worst in the league. And a goal scorer like Duclair could be just what they need to bump that up. So does that mean he's going to be a good fantasy option? I'll say this, there's a lot of risk baked in here, but at only 14% ownership, he may be one of the few guys on this list that's available in your league. And if you're desperate for some production on the wing, maybe it's worth a shot depending on what you have in your lineup. He is only 14% owned, so that would be the main appeal. And he is a proven goal scorer with some power play exposure as well on a really good team. That should be a second half team given the fact that they're getting healthy and they're starting to pick it up a little bit. They do need to do something about Bobrovsky, though he's terrible. An even bigger wild card is Jakub Vrana, who entered into the player assistance program and therefore doesn't have a timetable for return. Now, if he does return at some point this year, he'll be coming back to a very potent Detroit offense that may or may not have room for him on the power play. So there's a lot of risk to owning Vrana. But the reasons you'd want to do this is that you saw a glimpse of his potential last year where he had 13 goals in 26 games, which is a 41 goal pace over 82. And he consistently puts up around 0.75 points per game. For me, this is a lot less attractive than some of the other guys, but again, he has potential, and if he can get the help he needs and return in a better mental space or whatever's going on, then maybe you can mine some fantasy value when nobody's looking. But it seems to me like a lot of people are looking if he's 35% rostered, despite pretty much not playing a game all year, if I'm remembering correctly. Now, the last guy on this list is a guy who may be coming back any day now, and that's Dmitry Orlov. So there's nothing special about his production, but he is a solid point producer and can score some goals. So he averaged 0.15 goals per game the last 2 seasons, which is a 12-goal pace, which is not bad at all for a defenseman. But he also gets a few hits and blocks as well. 1.63 hits per game, 1.23 blocks per game. So not irrelevant in those areas as well. He's somewhere between a streaming option and a long-term hold, just something that you have to monitor and decide if he has a place on your team given what you already have. This year, 2 shots per game, 2.3 hits per game, 5 points in 13 games, all assists. But when the Caps, when he's not in the lineup, the Caps do miss him when he's not out there. And he should be coming back any day now. And if you just lost maybe Chris Letang, who's potentially going to be out for a couple months, he's not necessarily a direct replacement, but he could be a short-term option for some guys out there. Now, a few honorable mentions. Palat, he's likely going to return to the Devils lineup that doesn't really need him at the moment. They're 19-4. He'll be one cog in the machine that is the powerhouse New Jersey Devils, but that may expose him to a nice line assignment with Hughes or Hischier, so he may be worth a shot when he is healthy, but he's not necessarily going to be the go-to guy, as they are kind of getting it done by committee, and then, Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier having excellent seasons, Jesper Bratt having an excellent season. So it's not just one guy. They're kind of spreading it around. Cam Atkinson, a 25 goal scorer most years. He's set to come back any day now. 0.69 point per game average. Good, but not great. But this likely falls into the category of good power play options on bad teams, which I've gone over in a lot of the weekly videos. An ex-Flyer, Jakub Voracek, similar case when healthy. They'll need him to produce in Columbus, especially on the power play, but he is a one-trick pony with assists as his one trick. As you can see, 11 games, 1 goal, 5 assists, 10% owned, so he's probably there for you. Rielly hasn't ever really been a fantasy option, but he is young, and Tampa could use some depth. 17 goal pace last year, so if he can build off of that, or if you're in a face-off league, he does become a little bit more valuable, and especially because he's dual center left wing eligible. So I'm in a face-off league. I actually have him on my IR right now for that purpose, but if you're not in a face-off league, he's not as valuable. But the guy I'm keeping an eye on this list is Adam Boqvist, and I've mentioned him a few times. I mentioned him when Werenski went down, but he was also hurt at the time. But he could potentially become that power play quarterback in Columbus, which they desperately need right now, and that would make him more fantasy valuable. He's a goal scorer as well. So 2 out of the last 3 seasons he's played, he's averaged 0.21 goals per game, which is a 17-goal pace. So he could be a valuable specialty tool for your fantasy team if you're in need of a power play quarterback, goal-scoring defenseman. And again, that could be an option, a really desperate option, I'll be honest with you. But Chris Letang replacement for a short period of time. If Boqvist can get back soon, that could potentially be a short-term replacement. But it is a little bit of a weaker replacement for what Letang usually provides, if not providing this year. But that's the list. That's almost everybody that's on the IR right now, and I've ranked them according to their fantasy value and potential. You need to decide what your team is lacking and try to plug a hole with one of these guys if that's the route that you want to go. Now, again, my philosophy is to construct the best roster possible for a head-to-head playoff matchup, and that's what some of these guys can provide for you if you stash them and hold on. And as I said before, I'm holding Ehlers, Pacioretty, and Laine, so I'll have some hard decisions to make when they're all healthy, but some guys usually are in and out of the lineup. There's always guys in and out of IR, so that should help me with my weakness on left wing, and that's the hole that I'm trying to plug with these guys. So make the call for your team. You know what your team needs and what they could potentially benefit from going forward in the playoffs. But that's going to do it for this video. I want to thank you again for sticking with it until the end. Make sure to like, subscribe, and follow Data Draft on Instagram. Tell your friends, spread the word about the channel. Anything helps. But thank you again, and I will see you in the next one.